It was one of those perfect summer nights, the kind that seems to exist purely for the making of memories. The air hung warm and sweet around us, scented with the lingering traces of barbecue smoke and someone's expensive cologne. I remember looking up at the string lights that crisscrossed the backyard. They swayed gently in the evening breeze, casting golden pools of light that transformed an ordinary gathering into something magical. These weren't just any lights. They were the kind that make everyone look their best version of themselves, softening edges and highlighting the sparkle in people's eyes. The kind of lighting that makes you believe, just for a moment, that anything could happen. I hadn't wanted to come to this party in the first place. Social gatherings have always made me anxious. The forced small talk, the constant awareness of where to put my hands, the fear of saying something stupid. I'm the guy who typically finds an excuse to leave early, who gravitates toward the family pet rather than joining the crowd around the keg. My friend Ellie had practically dragged me here, insisting that I needed to get out more and that this would be good for me. Easy for her to say. She was in her element at parties, flitting from group to group like a social butterfly, while I stood awkwardly clutching my drink like it was a life preserver. But then he walked in, and suddenly I didn't mind being there so much. Alex had that effect on rooms, and on me. He was tall with dark, curly hair that fell just right no matter how many times he ran his fingers through it. He had a way of moving that seemed both deliberate and completely natural, like he was perfectly comfortable in his own skin. When he laughed, it was never the polite chuckle most people offer in social settings. It was full-bodied and genuine, the kind of laugh that makes everyone around him want to laugh too, just to be part of whatever joy he's experiencing. We'd met 3 months ago through a mutual friend's study group. I was struggling through organic chemistry while he seemed to grasp the concepts effortlessly. He'd noticed my frustration one night and had slid his chair next to mine, explaining reaction mechanisms in a way that finally made sense. It's like a dance, he'd said, drawing arrows between molecules. Everything wants to be with something else. You just have to learn the choreography. After that night, we'd fallen into an easy friendship. We'd grab coffee before class, text about random things throughout the day, and occasionally meet up to study. But there was always something more simmering beneath the surface, at least for me. I watched as Alex made his way through the party, stopping to chat with people, clapping backs, giving hugs. He had this gift of making whoever he was talking to feel like the most important person in the room. I admired that about him. How easily he connected with others, how freely he gave of himself. It was so different from my own careful approach to relationships, always holding something back, always afraid of revealing too much. When our eyes met across the crowded living room, he smiled that smile, the one that created a dimple in his left cheek, and began making his way toward me. My heart did that ridiculous flutter thing that I pretended didn't happen every time he looked at me. "You came," he said, pulling me into a quick hug. He smelled like cedar and something citrusy. "Ellie said she was going to try to convince you, but I didn't think she'd succeed." "Yeah, well, she can be pretty persuasive when she wants to be," I replied, trying to sound casual despite the fact that my pulse was racing from the brief contact. "She threatened to post those pictures from freshman orientation if I didn't show up." Alex laughed, throwing his head back slightly. "Now I'm curious about these pictures. Trust me, they should be classified as weapons of mass embarrassment." The conversation flowed easily after that, as it always did with Alex. We talked about classes, about the party host's questionable taste in music, about the latest superhero movie we'd both seen last weekend. Around us, the party continued, people dancing in the living room, a heated game of beer pong on the dining table, couples finding quiet corners for more intimate conversations. But in our little bubble, it felt like we were the only ones there. I'm not sure exactly when the dynamic shifted. Maybe it was when he leaned in closer to hear me over the music, his shoulder pressing against mine. Maybe it was when he reached out to brush a piece of lint from my shirt, his fingers lingering just a second too long. Or maybe it was when he looked at me in the middle of a story I was telling, his eyes focused so intently on my face that I forgot what I was saying. "Do you want to get some air?" he asked suddenly, nodding toward the back door. "It's getting kind of stuffy in here." I nodded, not trusting my voice. We weaved through the crowd, Alex occasionally placing his hand on the small of my back to guide me through particularly congested areas. Each touch sent a jolt through me, like static electricity, but warmer, more pleasant. The backyard was less crowded, but not empty. Small groups of people stood chatting, their faces illuminated by those string lights I'd admired earlier. The music was slightly muffled out here, creating a more intimate atmosphere. Alex led me toward the far corner of the yard, where an old wooden fence separated the property from the neighbors. The string lights didn't quite reach this area, casting us in partial shadow. "Better?" he asked, leaning against the fence. "Yeah," I replied, suddenly very aware of how alone we were despite being at a party with dozens of people. It's nice to be able to hear myself think. Alex studied me for a moment, his expression unreadable. "You know, I've been thinking about something lately," he said, his voice taking on a more serious tone than our usual banter. Oh, my mouth went dry. What about? Instead of answering immediately, he pushed off from the fence and took a step toward me. Then another. I found myself backing up until I felt the wooden slats press against my back. He placed one hand on the fence beside my head, effectively boxing me in without actually touching me. The space between us crackled with possibility. "About you," he finally said, his voice lower now. "About us." My heart was hammering so loudly I was sure he could hear it. "What about us?" I managed to ask, my voice embarrassingly unsteady. And then he grinned. Not his usual friendly smile, but something different, something that held intent and promise. It transformed his face, making him look both boyish and undeniably masculine at the same time. In that moment, with the string lights casting golden halos in his hair and that grin lighting up his features, he was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. "I think you know," he said softly. "I think you've known for a while now." And I had. Of course I had. Those lingering looks, the unnecessary touches, the way our conversations sometimes trailed into comfortable silence, neither of us wanting to leave even when we'd run out of things to say. I'd noticed it all, cataloged every interaction, replayed them in my mind when I couldn't sleep at night. But I'd convinced myself it was one-sided, that someone like Alex couldn't possibly be interested in someone like me. I started, but words failed me. How do you articulate something you've been feeling for months, but never allowed yourself to acknowledge fully? Alex's grin softened into something more vulnerable. "It's okay if you don't feel the same way," he said quickly. "I just thought. I've been getting signals, and if I'm reading this wrong, just tell me and we can forget this ever happened." I couldn't bear to hear him doubt himself, not when my own heart was practically beating out of my chest with wanting him. So I did the bravest thing I've ever done. I closed the distance between us and pressed my lips to his. For a heartbeat, he seemed surprised, frozen in place. Then his hand moved from the fence to cup the back of my neck, pulling me closer as he kissed me back. His lips were soft but insistent, moving against mine with a certainty that made my knees weak. I felt his other hand settle on my waist, warm and steady, anchoring me as the world seemed to tilt on its axis. When we finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, that grin was back on his face, but now it held a hint of wonder, as if he couldn't quite believe what had just happened. "So," he said, his thumb tracing small circles on the nape of my neck, "I guess I wasn't reading things wrong after all." I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in months. "No, definitely not wrong. Just slow on the uptake." "Slow?" He raised an eyebrow in mock offense. "I've been dropping hints for weeks." "Hints? What hints? Are you serious?" He shook his head in disbelief. "The coffee dates? The movie where I definitely did the yawn and stretch move to put my arm around you? The time I literally said, 'Your eyes are incredible,' while we were studying? I thought you were just being nice." I protested, though even to my own ears it sounded ridiculous now. "And that wasn't a date. We were just getting coffee before class. I specifically asked if you wanted to grab coffee sometime, and you said, 'Sure, we have class tomorrow morning.' I had to pretend that's what I meant." He was laughing now, his body shaking slightly against mine. "Oh God," I groaned, letting my forehead fall against his shoulder in embarrassment. "I'm an idiot." His hand moved to stroke my hair gently. "Not an idiot," he said softly. "Just cautious. I get it. It's scary, putting yourself out there." I lifted my head to look at him. "It is scary," I admitted. "But this," I gestured between us, "feels worth being scared for." The vulnerability in his eyes matched what I was feeling. "Yeah," he agreed, his voice thick with emotion. "It does." We stayed like that for a while, talking quietly in our little corner of the yard, occasionally kissing when words didn't seem enough. We talked about when we'd first noticed our feelings shifting from friendship to something more. For him, It was during a study session when I'd fallen asleep on his couch, and he'd found himself watching me breathe instead of reviewing his notes. For me, it was when he'd remembered how I take my coffee after I'd only mentioned it once in passing. "So what happens now?" I finally asked, voicing the question that had been hovering at the edges of our conversation. Alex's fingers intertwined with mine, his thumb rubbing small circles on my palm. "Now," he said thoughtfully, "I'd like to take you on a proper date. One where you definitely know it's a date beforehand." I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with the summer night. "I'd like that." "And then," he continued, his eyes twinkling with mischief, "I'd like to kiss you again. Preferably somewhere more comfortable than against a fence." "The fence has its charms," I teased, enjoying the way his eyes darkened slightly at my words. "True," he conceded, leaning in to press a light kiss to the corner of my mouth. "But I have many more ideas I'd like to explore." The promise in his voice sent a shiver down my spine. "I'm open to suggestions," I managed to say, proud that my voice remained steady despite the way my heart was racing. We might have stayed in that corner all night, lost in each other and the newness of what we'd found, if Ellie hadn't come looking for me. "There you are," she called, her voice cutting through our private bubble. "I've been looking everywhere." She stopped short when she saw how close we were standing, Alex's hand still holding mine. Her eyes widened, then a slow, knowing smile spread across her face. "Never mind, take your time. I just wanted to make sure you hadn't left without saying goodbye." "We'll be in soon," Alex assured her, not taking his eyes off me. After she left, we both burst into laughter. "Well, everyone's going to know by tomorrow," I said, feeling a mixture of nervousness and excitement at the thought. "Is that okay with you?" Alex asked, suddenly serious. "If you want to keep this between us for now, I understand." The fact that he asked, that he cared about my comfort even in this moment of joy, made my heart swell. "It's more than okay," I told him honestly. "I'm not interested in hiding how I feel about you." His smile then was different from the grin that had started all this, softer, more intimate, like a secret shared between just the two of us. He leaned in to kiss me again, and as our lips met, one of the string lights above us flickered, casting dancing shadows across our faces. It felt like a sign, a cosmic acknowledgement of the shift that had just occurred in our lives. Later, as we rejoined the party, I couldn't help but look up at those string lights again. They were just cheap decorations, probably picked up at a discount store, but tonight they had witnessed something profound. Under their gentle glow, two people had found the courage to be honest about their feelings, to take a risk on something that might hurt, but could also bring immeasurable joy. The weeks that followed that night were filled with discoveries, both about each other and ourselves. I learned that Alex sings in the shower, but only songs from the 80s. He discovered my irrational fear of butterflies and never once made me feel silly about it. We had our first argument over whether pineapple belongs on pizza. It absolutely does not, despite his passionate defense. We stayed up all night talking about our childhoods, our dreams, our fears. And through it all, those moments under the string lights remained a touchstone, a reminder of how something beautiful can begin in the most unexpected places. 6 months later, Alex surprised me by recreating that corner of the yard in his apartment. String lights hung across his living room, a makeshift fence constructed from painted cardboard. It was ridiculous and perfect, and so completely him. As he pressed me against his fake fence and grinned that now familiar grin, I realized something profound. Love isn't always grand gestures and dramatic declarations. Sometimes it's string lights and wooden fences. Sometimes it's a grin that says everything words can't. Sometimes it's finding the courage to close the distance between yourself and another person, knowing that the risk is worth the potential reward. And as Alex kissed me in that ridiculous, perfect recreation of the moment that changed everything, I knew with absolute certainty that I had made the right choice that night. Under those string lights, pressed against that fence, facing that grin that held so much promise, I had chosen to be brave. And bravery, I was learning, often led to the very best kinds of happiness. Looking back now, I can see how that moment was pivotal not just for our relationship, but for who I was becoming. The shy, anxious person who had been dragged to that party was still part of me, but he was no longer all of me. Alex hadn't changed me. That's not how healthy relationships work, but his presence in my life had created a space where I felt safe enough to change myself. to grow into someone braver, more open, more willing to take risks. And isn't that what love should do? Not transform us into different people, but create conditions where we can transform ourselves, where we can look at the parts of us that are hidden or scared or uncertain and gently coax them into the light. That night under the string lights, when he pressed me to the fence and grinned, wasn't just the beginning of us. It was the beginning of a new chapter for me as an individual. A chapter where I learned that vulnerability isn't weakness but the deepest kind of strength. Where I discovered that the scariest leaps often lead to the softest landings. Where I found that sometimes, the most profound act of self-discovery happens when we allow ourselves to be truly seen by another person. So if you find yourself under string lights someday, facing someone whose smile makes your heart forget its rhythm, remember this. Courage doesn't mean not being afraid. It means recognizing that some things are worth being afraid for. It means pressing through the fear to reach for what might be waiting on the other side. Because sometimes, what's waiting is a love that will teach you how to be brave in all the ways that matter. Total_char_count, 17,983.